Hi guys, welcome to a brand new series called The Huddle, where Bhaskar and we try to get into a huddle with experts from various fields within the game to try and understand the game a little better because we hardly have any understanding of such. But I'm really excited to call upon our first guest. I feel if there was an IPL for cricket writers, then this guy would go at the same price as Virat Kohli. The only difference being that he probably would win a few titles as well along the way, in at least the first 14 years. So on that note, I would really like Abhaskar start applauding. Let's do a stand-up welcome for him. Let's start
yay!
applauding and please welcome Jarrod Kimber.
Wow, that's quite an introduction, gentlemen.
No pressure on you at all. Jarrod.
Exactly. Just Virat Kohli. Does that mean I have to go a little bit slower and make all the decisions that don't end up well? Sorry,
You
we're not
might
going to
have
talk
to
about
say
the
Ben
IPL.
Stokes in between, just for the chat to be happy. Do you understand the Ben Stokes reference that we keep associating Virat Kohli with?
No, I was just about to call up Anil Kumble and tell him he'd lost his job.
All right, I'm going to straight away dive in. So we read up about you a little bit. We did some stalking behavior. And at one point, you made a list of your dream jobs.
Mm.
And then you started with, I think, writer, director, musician, cricketer, and working in a CD store. So, how old were you when you did this?
I must have been about 16 or 17. Just going through a very long, awkward teenage rebellion stage, which lasted about a very long time, sadly.
But at that age, you had realized that cricketer is not going to be number one.
Yeah, I mean, I was still playing cricket.
And if I'm not wrong, you used to bowl leg spin as well, and you used to wicket keep as well. You used to bat as well. You were doing everything.
I can wicket keep. I wouldn't say I'm a wicket keeper, but I certainly have. I've done pretty much every role in a cricket game you can do. I've opened the bowling with the new ball when our teams needed it. I've bowled cutters in the middle overs. I've bowled off spinner, but mostly I'm a leg spinner who slogs it. And I batted every position 1 to 11. So.
But honestly, if you continued like a leg spinner who could slog a little bit, you would go for $1 million in the IPL.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think it was funny. When I first started as a cricket writer, one of the first people I wrote about a lot was Bryce McGain. And I think I realized at that stage that had I just focused on looking at spinners' techniques and maybe going and watching the best club spinners around Melbourne, and Abdul Qadir played in Melbourne for a little while, and gone and watched some of the guys like not just Shane Warne, but the guys who didn't quite make it. I reckon I probably could have built myself into being a decent leg spinner. But I have very small hands for a leg spinner, and I don't have a very powerful arm. And those are two things that actually help if you don't have good biomechanics, which I also didn't have. So there's a lot going against me, if we're being honest. But yeah, it was still, I was still taking my cricket pretty seriously. I played junior representative cricket, so I wasn't an absolute donkey. But that was about the age where my cricket pretty much stalled. I think that's fair to say.
I'm going to go through a list of things that I found online. So you failed English in high school. Is that correct?
Yeah. I got kicked out of high school twice.
You got kicked out of high school, yeah.
So to say I failed English is probably pushing it a little bit. I mean, I failed everything. I failed maths as well. I failed PE one year.
As a cricketer, you failed PE, all right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Which is, and I was a pretty good athlete in most sports. So it wasn't like, I just didn't turn up, I think it's fair to say. I think I spent the last couple of years in high school turning up at lunchtime, which was probably not the most ideal situation. I failed English. I was always very good at writing, creative writing, and then and probably a little bit nonfiction as well. But I had burnt so many teachers. I think by that point there was a couple of teachers so my family are educators. They're all teachers. Yeah. And my family are quite famous in education in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and that's where I was being brought up. And half the teachers had worked for my grandfather or knew of my grandfather. My uncle ran big parts of the education department. My auntie was a psychologist for the education department. My other auntie and uncle were teachers. My mum was a school librarian.
Yeah.
So everyone sort of knew someone in my family. And I think that there was a couple of teachers who sort of went, there's a lot to work with here, and they would try very hard. And then there were a couple of teachers who just couldn't get past the fact that I was a bit of I didn't, I suppose this has gone into the rest of my career. I didn't I didn't take fools very well. If you're a teacher and you said something that you couldn't back up with your own knowledge, I could not take you seriously. And you can understand if they're a teacher in a bit of a rough school. Like the first day of my school, a kid got expelled for stabbing another kid. It was not a friendly environment when I went there. It's a much nicer middle class school now, but back when I went, it was rough. One of my friends, he was a Sri Lankan kid who moved over from Sri Lanka, and he got pissed on by a Vietnamese kid, and I mean literally pissed on. So we had racial elements to our school. We had heroin was a big problem in and around our school. There was a lot of stuff going on. And I suppose if you're a teacher having to deal with all that sort of stuff, and then you sit at the top of the class and you say something, and someone like me says, well, that doesn't make sense because of this, and this. Of which I'd probably read outside the class because I didn't read anything. So they're going, how does he know this if I asked him to do a simple thing yesterday and he spent the whole day at the back of the class throwing a tennis ball at his friends, right? Yeah. So I think there was a lot of that. I wasn't learning anything at school. This is the thing that I kept saying to them. I'm not learning. So at primary school, they would keep me on my own. They would send me off into a corner and just go do this. And I did really well. At high school, they refused to do that, except for a couple of teachers. And the one teacher who did that was probably the reason that I became a writer.
First of all, if you were in India and if you had a full
none of this would happen if I was in India.
First of all, this is still happening in UP, right? Kids are pissing on each other without any racial lines. That's just what people do on a Tuesday lunch break.
I believe so.
But like if I knew the principal, the librarian was my mother, I would never fail any subject in India.
I wouldn't exist in India. But also most cricket countries, you don't have working class people writing about cricket, right? The English people, half the people that write about cricket went to fucking Eton. Yeah. In South Africa, to work in cricket, you have to have gone to one of the posh schools. In Sri Lanka, half the batters went to the same school. Do you know what I mean? Like, Australia is such a unique environment in general. And one of the best things about Australia going back, maybe not so much the case anymore, was you could kind of make it from any background. I'm not quite sure that's the same in Australia anymore. And so being very different in Australia is sometimes seen as a massive strength, which is maybe not the case in the country I live in England now. And as you know, in India, you are supposed to follow the script as much as physically possible until you are a doctor/engineer and married with 4 kids.
Yeah, now the script is changing a bit. I ended up becoming a comedian after completing my MBA, by the way. That is when I got the blessing.
You had to do the work, didn't you?
Yeah.
From the outside, I kind of always knew my goal. I always knew that if I found the thing that I was most interested in, I'd be able to throw myself at it and make something of it. But it's very hard to explain that to other people. I remember another school teaching friend of mine. So a friend of mine, his parents are both school teachers, and they always tried to encourage me because they couldn't understand why their kids I think that at times they would say that their kids were maybe not quite as intelligent as me, and their kids were doing great. Their kids had houses and kids and marriages and jobs, and I was parking cars for a living. And and this guy took me to the side and he said, "Look, I've started doing trading online, stocks and shares." And he said, "You'll be able to pick this up in a minute." And I said, "I know from where you are, it all looks like my life is a giant pile of shit." Right. Yeah. And it kind of is, but you have to know that what I've been doing over the last 6 years, so probably from the age of 22 to 28, is investing in myself. And if you are looking from the outside, you are probably thinking, he's already done that and it hasn't worked. You have to trust me on this. I don't know why, but it's about to work. And he just went, "All right, I trust you. We'll see how you go." And I remember I saw him when I was about 32. So only about 4 years later. By that stage, I was pretty much a successful writer in the UK, and things had completely changed. And he said, "You were right." And that's a long time to wait for someone to come good. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah.
But all right, you said a very important point was that you were investing in yourself, right? This is something that I think people in their 20s really struggle today. Especially the people I look around me, because they want success with everything that they start, right? We don't talk about failures. But one of the things I want to understand, because even I quit my job and got into this full time, is how did you get the confidence while you were doing this? Like now that you look back, because this happens, I'm guessing at least half a decade ago. Now, if you look back, if you look back and you analyze and you're like, why was I so confident? Why did I think this is going to work?
Do you know what? I basically knew I could write and I knew I could talk. So at 17, I gave the eulogy at my nan's funeral. And I don't think I was particularly good at it. But the fact that they gave a 17-year-old the rights to do a eulogy tells you where I was kind of seen in my community, I think, at that time. At 21, I gave another eulogy at my grandfather's funeral. That one was a bit more shared, so a few of us did it. But again, I did sort of the lion's bulk work of that kind of eulogy. I knew that there was something there all the time when it came to writing. So we talked about that teacher before. So in year 8, so I was about 13 or 14, and my schooling had already crashed. And we had this great, he was a professor. He was a Russian, he was born in Russia. And he'd been a professor, and he moved to Australia and become a school teacher. And he was massively overqualified to teach at our school, and also absolutely horrendous teacher. And I just mean that on a basis of he couldn't relate to people that didn't have his intellectual curiosity. If you had his curiosity, he was the best teacher ever, because he would be like, I'm going to go get you 10 books now. You're going to sit in the corner and you're going to do this, right? Yeah. But if you didn't have that, he was just like, oh, that guy's an idiot, and he'd walk away. So he was a terrible high school teacher. But I don't think he thought there was anything special about me, but we did this thing. It was really, really small, where he got a comic. It was like a small blank comic, and it was like a Middle Ages drawing. And in it, and he got everyone in the class, have a look at this and write a short story based on it. And everyone else did a very basic, bland sort of short story. And I wrote this big thing about there was one person who had fallen in this comic. I think it was like, it might have been like a mid 1500s. You know that weird one that's on the internet where there's a guy. Actually, I won't even explain it, but it's like a sort of a very English style comic strip. And I wrote this whole thing about the plague and about what it would be like to be the last person left on Earth. Basically,
so really dark for an 8th grader.
Yeah, but it was quite funny. It was before I'd seen Omega Man, but it was actually very similar to I don't know, I Am Legend, Omega Man, whichever version of that you've seen.
Legend,
okay. The Will Smith version or the older version. There's about 83 versions of it now. But
Jarrod, are you admitting your first piece of literature was copied from a movie?
No, I didn't even know. This is the thing. But clearly, I had the ability to make up a world from nothing.
Yeah.
And so everything was going really bad at that stage. And I remember we went to a parent-teacher conference, and this teacher, who I really respected his intellectual, abilities, and I didn't respect anyone at all in life at that point. So it was kind of a big deal for me to do that. And he had this thing, and my dad thought he was a lunatic, right? And he was a bit of a lunatic. I loved him. Alex Picacci. Sadly, I've never been able to find him. I have looked him up a few times. Wherever he disappeared so brilliantly. There's no way he'd ever have a Facebook account. But he just sat my parents down and said, look, I don't know if you know what you have here, but this guy has an incredible brain and the ability to make up things and describe things in ways that other kids his age don't have. Now, when I was 5 or 6, I used to write Shirley Temple movies. Those ones were ripped off. Although I would come up with my own plot, but based on Shirley Temple. And I think in between, I probably hadn't done as much of that sort of stuff. But I think him telling me that, in the back of my mind, that never went away. Now, 30 teachers might have told me that I was a fucking idiot and a waste of space. And they did. They told me I had a teacher straight to my face tell me I'd never account to anything, heaps of times. Oh my God, over and over again. I wrote one good thing in my latter half of my high school career, and the teachers accused me of plagiarizing because they said it was too good to come from someone as stupid as me. That's an honest quote, right?
Wow.
But I didn't rate any of those opinions because I thought they were idiots, right? I think that because that one teacher had told me something, and occasionally something would happen and I would write something and people would look at it and just be like, oh my God, how did you come up with this? I knew there was something there. And
so you were getting enough positive sort of reinforcements from different people that you respected, that made you believe.
Yeah, I think there was enough people. So there's a famous stand-up comedian. I don't know if you know him. He might be slightly before you got into stand-up comedy, but a guy called Franklin Ajay.
No, I can't.
Franklin Ajay, Google him, just an absolute next level comedic genius. Got very famous in the late 80s, early 90s, and then got famous and moved to Australia and doesn't do much stand-up comedy anymore and just does a little bit. He wrote on huge shows as a joke writer, sitcoms and things like that. Absolute brilliant. I sent him a letter when he moved to Australia. I didn't know how you studied under him because I didn't understand how TAFE and university and everything worked. I'd left high school by this point. I said, look, I don't know how to study under you. I said, but I know that you're the best comedy writer that I can come into contact with. I'd love to chat to you. And I remember I was at my girlfriend's house and my mum rang up and said, you have to come home now. There's a message on the answering machine from Franklin Ajay. And I dragged her to see him live a couple of times. So my mum actually knew, she couldn't believe that a famous person had called our house. And I must have been 18 or 19. I was pushing trolleys at that stage for a living. So he left a message and he said, call me back. And, he had some office in Melbourne and we must have spent 2.5 hours chatting. And it's why I say yes. I mean, you're obviously a very well-known podcast, but the last guy who asked me to be in a podcast was, had about 12 followers. And it's kind of why I say yes, is because Franklin Ajay took the time with me and it meant something to me. And I don't care if your podcast had, who's the big famous guy? Gaurav
Kapoor?
Yeah, is he the guy with the Spotify podcast? I should know.
Yeah, Gaurav Kapoor.
Yeah. Sorry.
22 yarns.
Yeah, 22 yarns. Sorry, I should know that. I do know. I have met him, but I'm terrible with details of anyone who's not a cricketer or in a movie. And, I say yes to him and I say yes to the guy who's doing his first podcast episode, right? It doesn't matter to me. And a lot of that comes back to Franklin Ajay. But anyway, I'm 18
I need to thank Franklin for today.
Yeah. I'm about 18 and a half years old. I'm pushing trolleys for a living. And Franklin Ajay spends 2.5 hours talking to me about writing, specifically about comedy writing, but also we talked a lot more about, we talked a little bit about stand-up because at that stage I thought I wanted to be a stand-up. And we talked a lot about comedy writing and a little bit about writing in general. And he was like agreeing with stuff I said, right? And he was involved in the conversation. He didn't have to give me 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He gave me 2.5 hours because he saw something in me, right? Little things like that kept happening. There was a woman, and I forget her name, but I think her name is Jessica, and she worked at Qantas. And at Qantas, I would work the overnight shift, and I would take in notebooks and just write stuff, right? Because you could go half an hour, 40 minutes without getting a call some nights. Some nights it was very busy, but some nights it wasn't. And I write stuff. And she said one day, can I just read some of your stuff? She comes over and she reads some of my stuff. And the next night she came over to me and she came over with this like nice clean bit of paper. And she put it down. She said, can you write your autograph here? Now I was 23. No one knew who the fuck I was. I was working at 2 a.m. in a call center for an airline. And she was just like, I don't know how I know this, but I think one day people are going to know who you are. And I want to be the person who first has your autograph. You remember all these things, right? And my cousin, who I talked about before, who worked in the government, he did everything right in his life, right? Other than maybe occasionally drinking too much. Sorry, Joel, but maybe on occasion. He did really well in high school. He went to university. He went and studied the thing that he had a passion in, but also would give him a job. Do you know what I mean? Like he didn't just go after one or the other. He was really clever and going, I want to be involved in this kind of thing. So I'm going to try and find a thing here. And he did everything right. And we have a mutual friend of ours who is a basketballer who played college basketball in America. Really good basketballer. And he said to me, this guy said to me, Todd Spear, brilliant writer himself, now writes on the NBA. And Todd said to me, if I give you my footage, can you edit it together? Because he knew I liked filmmaking and everything. And so I edited Todd's footage together to make sort of like a supercut of his basketball, right? But I went a bit over the top on it because I was really getting into editing at the time, and it was a really good clip. Sadly, I think the music that we used is no longer legal, so it's probably still on YouTube, but you can't see the full effect of what I did. Anyway, when my cousin saw that, he was just like, he said, "What are you doing with your life? Like, if you can do this, what are you doing?" And I think it was just those 4 things really stick out, and it's why You know, it's why when I'm working, you know, in with people, like sometimes I just like to stop and say to them, you know, you're really good at this. What you're doing right now, you know, there is a talent that you have, or what you did there, other people could not do. You need to know that, because I know that those little things matter to me. But on top of all that, I just knew I could write, and I can't fully explain that. If it goes back to the Shirley Temple stuff, if it goes back to Alex Piccacci, or if it just goes back to every time I sort of wrote something and someone saw it, they'd be like, this is really good. But I just knew that I could write. And I backed the fact that one day that would come in handy. And it has.
It really has. Hi friends, so that was the end of part 1 of our interview with Jarrod Kimber. Actually हमने पूरा वीडियो एक ही पार्ट में निकालना था, बट फिर हम जब पर्सनल लाइफ की बातें करने लगे तो मैं भी इमोशनल हो गया, भास्कर भी हो गया, जैरेड सर भी हो गए, तो कुछ ज्यादा ही बातें होगी, इसलिए हमने सोचा हम 2 पार्ट में निकालेंगे. सेकंड पार्ट आएगा कल, और अगर आप कल के बाद ये वीडियो देख रहे हो तो सेकंड पार्ट ऊपर कहीं आपको एक लिंक आ जाएगा, उस पर क्लिक करो, सीधा आपको सेकंड पार्ट पे ले जाएगा. ऑल्सो डोंट फॉरगेट टू सब्सक्राइब टू द चैनल, शेयर द चैनल एंड लाइक द वीडियो. कमेंट करिए वीडियो पे आपको इंटरव्यू कैसा लगा, आपको कैसे लाइफ लर्निंग लगे जैरेड किम्बर के पर्सनल लाइफ से जो हमें मिलते हैं. एंड अगर आपने सब्सक्राइब कर रखा है तो नोटिफिकेशन बेल दबाना मत भूलिए. सी यू टुमारो विद द सेकंड पार्ट.